So Xiaomi have clearly been smashing the bloody Weetabix every morning because they kickstarted 2025 by launching a shagload of new Redmi Note smartphones. And it's the same deal as always, decent hardware for not much cash. And this right here is the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G. It's not the swankiest of the bunch, that would be the Pro Plus 5G, but you still get plenty of the same perks like full water resistance, a gorgeous, pleasingly poppy display, and a strokeably soft rear end that looks proper lush. 350 quid is the regular asking price here in the UK, but at the time I shot this video they were already doing a discount. Xiaomi loves a deal, so definitely keep your eyes on that website. And I've had my SIM secreted inside the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G for about a week now, so here's my full in-depth review, and for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So let's start, as always, with design, and the look and the feel of the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G certainly gets my spurt of approval. It may be nearly 6.7 inches, but it weighs a mere 190 grams, so pretty lightweight. And this lovely curved finish to the chassis means that it's comfortable to clutch as well. Mercifully, Xiaomi's decided not to go with perfectly flat iPhone-style edges, which are all the rage these days for some reason, despite the fact that those phones just feel crap. And sadly, it is your basic bog-standard glossy plastic frame, but that's pretty much my only bugbear with the design. As you can see, that display pretty much fills the entire front end of the Redmi Note Pro 5G. Very skinny bezels indeed, and then flip it around. And this here purple model actually sports a fake leathery soft touch style finish. But here in Blighty you can also pick up the Pro in a couple of other colour options, and I believe that those ones are made of glass instead. But yeah, I really like the soft touch finish, feels great against the palm, and also that patchwork style design really helps this phone to stand out from rivals, with the added bonus that it doesn't get all greasy and grimy with excessive fingering. This phone is proper hardy as well. You've actually got Gorilla Glass Victus 2 up front, which is quite rare at this sort of price point. That will help to protect from scratches and also fractures if you happen to fumble and drop this thing. You've also got a pre-installed screen protector slapped on there for extra durability. And while the previous generation of Pro smartphone was merely splash resistant, that's been upgraded for this 2025 model to full IP68 water and dust resistance, same as the Pro Plus. So that means you can drop it into a bath, into a sink or whatever, give it a good toweling off, should be absolutely fine. And again, that's a pretty rare feature for a fresh new budget-friendly smartphone. Now, to actually unlock the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G, you've got a basic in-display optical fingerprint sensor, which works absolutely fine. I've had zero jip from it this past week, quite responsive, as long as your fingers aren't wet or mucky. And as usual, got a bit of face unlock action as backup as well, just in case, which usually works pretty well as long as it's not too dark or you're wearing a weird hat or anything. And when you do unlock the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G, well, what you've got on here is HyperOS version 1 slapped on top of Android 14 still. No sign of the HyperOS 2 update just yet. And I'm really not sure why, because I've already covered the Poco X7 Pro, and that did come with HyperOS 2 built on top of Android 15 straight out of the box. So hopefully we'll be getting the latest, freshest software soon here on the Redmi Note 14 Pro. The good news is Xiaomi is guaranteeing 3 OS upgrades and 4 years of security patching when you buy this bad boy. Although I'm assuming one of those OS upgrades is just to Android 15 and HyperOS 2, which it really should have come with already. And of course, it's still pretty early days with this smartphone, but I have seen a few little hints of balkiness here and there during my week with it. Just wee irritations, like occasionally you'll load up an app, in this case Wuthering Waves, and be presented with a mostly black screen. And the only way to sort it is to basically quit the app and then restart it. Occasionally a website will just be a blank white page as well until you reload. And a few other grumbles as well that aren't bugs, just HyperOS weirdness. Like for instance, the always on display isn't actually ever always on. You can only display it for 10 seconds by tapping the screen. There's not even an option to turn it always on. It's just a heap of arse biscuits. And yes, you've got all your basic AI shenanigans on here, including a good bit of circle to search action and whoa, great mate, Gemini. But you do miss out on most of the AI shenanigans that Xiaomi crammed onto the Pro Plus model, the likes of AI Notes and AI Recorder, which can summarize and transcribe and do all that clever bollock stuff. Presumably because those all happen on device and you don't have the same hardware here, this is running a different chipset, a Mediatek effort, compared with the Qualcomm Snapdragon one that's in the Pro Plus. And for the storage, pretty generous as usual. You've got a choice of 256 or 512 gigs. Although as you can see, not expandable via micro SD memory card. For a bit of that, you'll actually have to downgrade to the Xiaomi Redmi Note 14 5G model, the non-Pro, as that does have micro SD memory card support. Now, the display tech hasn't radically changed up at all from the previous generation. It's once again a 6.67-inch AMOLED display slapped all across the front end of the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G. And that comes with a 1.5K resolution, as Xiaomi calls it. It's 2712 by 1220 pixels. And certainly in my rare bits of downtime where I wasn't shooting video about new Xiaomi smartphones, I did enjoy reclining with a bit of TV or movie action on the likes of Netflix, Disney+, etc. Those visuals are nice and crispy. You got full Dolby Vision and HDR10+ streaming support here. Those colors are customizable but pleasingly poppy on the default settings. Got the usual nighttime modes, etc. to keep your peepers safe, as well as 1920Hz PWM dimming if you are quite sensitive to OLED flicker. And that screen runs at 120Hz as well, although HyperOS, occasionally a bit juddery and stuff, doesn't really seem to run at its best here on the Redmi Note 14 Pro. And also, if you max out the brightness, well, no issues there with visibility outdoors. It's powerfully retina-searingly bright, but the auto brightness isn't fantastic. Occasionally, it will still be a bit too bright in the mornings when I wake up, which isn't particularly pleasant. And same thing last thing at night. And yes, sadly, because that screen does subtly curve around the edges there, I have noticed some responsiveness issues in my time with the Redmi Note 14 Pro. Just occasionally if I'm working on something in docs, for instance, and I try highlighting a bit of text right at the edge of the screen, I'll just really struggle to get it to work. And a couple of times it's been a bit balky when I've been trying to use the camera as well, especially when holding it at a low angle. But hey, a couple of instances over the course of a full week, it's not been too bad at all. And here's a bit of a preview of the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G's stereo speaker setup. Once again, that time of the year where budget phone fans gurgle with delight as Xiaomi releases a fresh batch of Redmi Note phones into the wild. So as you can hear there, pretty loud and clear output when you max out the volume. Not the absolute loudest that I've heard at this sort of price point, but certainly perfectly respectable. I've had no problems working in a kitchen, clattering pans, spilling shit everywhere while watching a bit of Netflix. And if you dive on into the audio settings as well, you'll see you've got full Dolby Atmos support. You do have the usual equalizer shenanigans, etc. Now, what's actually powering the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G? Well, it's Mediatek's Dimensity 7300, although apparently it's an ultra version of that 7300 chipset. Still not entirely sure what's ultra about it, as according to the specs it's the same clock speed as the original and everything. And that's backed in my review handset by 8 gigs of RAM, although you can boost that up to 12 gigs by just pouring some more cash at Xiaomi basically. And to be honest, I'd recommend doing so if you're going to go for the Redmi Note 14 Pro, because this phone can get quite juddery at times, sometimes just when flipping through the UI or just using the camera app. Thankfully, it is a bit better behaved when gaming, so more complex titles like Wuthering Waves can be played with a stable-ish frame rate. That's with various stipulations, like you'll need to run it on lower graphics settings and also make full use of that HyperOS GameTurbo mode and all of its various features to ensure that you get the best possible performance out of this thing. You won't see a full 60 frames per second extravaganza, but the action only occasionally dropped below 30 FPS in my extended gaming sessions, and obvious judders weren't too common. And if you play for over an hour, the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G stays reasonably cool as well. No issues with overheating here. Connectivity seemed to be fine for me as well. You got 5G support on here. I occasionally got a bit of 5G signal. Only really struggled to get online whenever I was in, for instance, a multi-story car park or some built-up structure like that. Now, as for the battery tech, well, you've got a 5110 mAh capacity cell stuffed in here. Shame this wasn't boosted for this generation, considering some mid-range rivals are now hitting that 6000 mAh capacity. In fact, the likes of the Honor Magic 7 Lite, for instance, 6600 mAh, while still retaining a fairly slim and light design. Now on my lighter days with the Redmi Note 14 Pro, I typically ended with around sort of 30% battery life remaining, but those are on my lighter days. If I used the camera a fair bit, did a bit of video chatting or some gaming, well then definitely I would end the day in battery saver mode. Never managed to completely deplete this thing in a single day though, so that's reassuring at least. And lighter users who maybe just, occasionally message or browse the web or whatever should find they can just about stretch to 2 full days from a charge. And if all you want to do is watch downloaded videos on this thing for some reason, you'll get around 17 to 18 hours of action. So battery life absolutely fine. Unfortunately, for some weird reason, the recharge speed seems to have dropped, downgraded from the previous generation. You've now got 45 watt wide charging on here, whereas the old Redmi Note 13 Pro supported 67 watt charging. So that's a bit poo. And as usual, I bugger all wireless charging support. And last up for this Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G review extravaganza, let's have a good hard squint at that camera tech. And don't expect much of an upgrade for those optics over the previous generation. In fact, it's the exact same 200 meg Samsung HP3 sensor that leads that lineup, and that's the same sensor that's also stuffed inside of the Pro Plus. And Xiaomi's camera app will be more than familiar to anyone who's used a Xiaomi smartphone in recent times. You can drag down a whole bunch of toggles like so. And of course you've got all the usual camera modes you can flip to, including a high-res 200 meg mode, which is quite good if you want to just slightly boost the detail levels as long as the lighting is on your side. And all the regular stuff, you've got your portrait mode, you've got your night mode, and if you keep on flicking towards more, you've got the Pro mode, which is pretty comprehensive stuff. You can quickly and simply change up the white balance, the ISO levels, etc. If you drag down again, you can also shoot in RAW format, turn on helpful features like a bit of focus peaking. But for the majority of my camera testing, I did what most people would do. I just left it in the regular photo mode. I also had the AI shenanigans turned on and that motion tracking focus. And overall, the color capture is reasonably natural, and the Note 14 Pro 5G can cope with strong contrast too, pumping out respectable HDR shots as long as you're not shooting directly into the sun. And you may find you occasionally have to fiddle around with the on-screen manual brightness slider as well, just to help prevent oversaturation when you do have a bit of strong backlighting, etc. But there were no issues with focus here, unlike the Pro Plus randomly. There is some pretty obvious sharpening at times in your photos, and softer light often means a bit of noise will creep in. But that said, night pics are pretty decent for a cheaper mid-range mobile. And I've got to say, for this sort of price point, the results really aren't bad at all. Of course, the other two shooters on the Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G are a basic 8 megapixel ultra-wide angle snapper, which, it's there if you need it. And also a very basic 2 megapixel macro sensor, which is next to useless. Meanwhile, around front, you've got yourself a simple 20 meg fixed focus selfie shooter as well. This can record up to full HD video, as I'm doing right now. There's no 4K option on there. The stabilization's perfectly fine. The audio pickup, as you can hear, reasonably clear as long as you're not in a noisy environment. And if you want to shoot photos with it, again, this is merely fine, capturing a respectable amount of detail and coping alright with HDR. You can also capture video with that rear camera setup up to 4K resolution, but sadly at 24-30 frames per second, there's no 60 FPS option. I found the focus occasionally popped when I was shooting something that moves about the place, as the Redmi decided whether to capture the thing in question or the background. And the frame rates can also be shockingly choppy at times, but the visuals are otherwise fine, and the audio pickup is okay as long as, again, you're not stood somewhere noisy, because there's zero AI smarts to cut down any background shenanigans. And there you have it, kiddies. That's what your Uncle Spurt reckons of the Xiaomi Redmi Note 14 Pro 5G after using it as my full-time phone for a week, and I gotta say, it's been alright. The highlight's definitely the design of the thing and the gorgeous display, absolutely no complaints there whatsoever. The battery life's been merely fine. The performance been a little bit juddery here and there, especially when gaming and using that camera. And the camera itself, pretty good for taking stills, but when it comes to home movies and stuff, I would steer clear, to be perfectly frank. Now, if you're intrigued, I've also done a unboxing video with the Redmi Note 14 Pro Plus 5G and a side-by-side comparison of the Note 14 5G, the Note 14 Pro 5G, and the Note 14 Pro Plus 5G. And frankly, your Uncle Spurt taking a bit of a break from Redmi phones, I reckon now. But anyway, yeah, it'd be great to hear what you guys reckon down in the comments below. So my brain is just like leaking out of my ears now. And hey, guess what? I've got to review the sodden Redmi watch next. Hooray. Rolling straight into that. Anyway, yes, please do subscribe, ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech, and have yourselves a friggin' ruddy, wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone. Love you.